We are speaking of a general transformation. I think the question is not whether, but when. Do you envision a time frame in reference to where we are now?
At the most a few decades, but perhaps much less. It could be a matter of years. I cannot imagine that today's human system will become sustainable without major shocks leading to major changes in consciousness.
Would it be injurious to the universe if our species goes extinct in 30 or 40 years?
If the universe is a progressive articulation of mind or consciousness, it is a branch of the evolving consciousness that was highly promising not long ago. It would be a pity if a species were to die out. It would be injurious to the universe in that the trend towards self-actualization, toward evolutionary unfolding, would be set back.
And that would be the only branch?
I don't think that we are of such cosmic importance that we couldn't be substituted by life and intelligence on other planets. Yet it would be better not to test this by dying out. We should learn from our mistakes. If we keep making mistakes, we become extinct. Natural selection works on us, as it works on everything. On a simpler level of evolution there are no continuously committed mistakes. But when a species reaches the level of consciousness where it can entertain alternatives, it can make mistakes.
Correct.
An evolved species is capable of adopting behaviors that are detrimental to its survival, as well as to the existence and survival of other species around it.
Yes, we have that power and we are exhibiting it.
We are making mistakes due to the power of our consciousness to choose among alternatives. Unfortunately, we have been choosing some of the wrong alternatives. That is a threat to our survival.
Yes, if that is the case, if the timeline is so tight, with which I happen to concur, I don't consider that pessimism, I consider that ultra-realism. I think that the entropic nature that we demonstrate at every level of our paradoxical fallacies, as I liken it, the situation we find ourselves in, is so vulnerable and fragile right now. I could not have imagined even 10 years ago this level of desperate peril in which our species and the entire biosphere is in. We have solely perpetrated this situation. If our time frame is so limited that we have not 100 years, or even 50 years left, and many, if not most, biologists would probably agree with this prognosis, if there is a large biospheric implosion just around the corner, and we are seeing glimpses of it every minute, then we have to move quickly and re-envision an alternative, as you used the word. And I don't mean the mundane alternative energy. We need a fundamental shift in human nature, what my mind cries out for, a new nature. And one that need to give birth to rapidly, given all of the different indices that are discordant, that are providing little evidence of positive congruence. If I had to summarize my experience with college students, I would say that for the most part they seem to feel empowered. Is that positive, or is that a blind spot? I don't know. I don't have the answer to that, not off my hip. But from a sociological purview I am aware that many of my peers in the younger generation seem to be oblivious or indifferent to the blank check condition of human existence. I attribute that to an escalating series of mood swings everywhere discernible, from the classroom to the Congress to public polls.
Just look at the dynamics of evolution on the biological level. Population biologists such as Niles Eldredge and Jay Gould argue that dynamics of human populations are dynamics of complex systems in general. It is not the Darwinian dynamics based on chance, and it does not produce a linear transformation. The dominant species in a biological population does not change, it just dies out. If that species makes mistakes consistently and is not replaced, the entire population of an ecosystem will become extinct. The alternative is that the mutations that are constantly occurring at the periphery are empowered to enter the space left by the outgoing dominant species.
They will occupy the dominant niche.
That is the nature of the system's dynamics of population evolution. It applies to the evolution of human species. Here, too, We cannot expect that the leading elements will change and transform all by themselves. What is likely to happen is that the level of crisis becomes so high that the system itself is imploding, and those who are leading it are no longer effective because their power to lead has been impaired and then removed. In the end, they have nothing to lead. At the same time, there is constant evolution at the periphery, and these are not necessarily biological mutations, they are cultural mutations. They are mutations of consciousness. Changes in the mentality that defines how people behave. They are decisive elements in an unstable system where the behavior even of a small group of people can modify the evolution of the whole system.
This is a very good analysis of what is going on during the recent decades on Earth, what is going on within our global population, or with our first global civilization, as I prefer to call it in our new paradigm description. I also think that very soon, in a few decades, the presently leading elements, still rooting in the previous medieval civilization, will become increasingly ineffective in their activities, will become increasingly isolated from the society, and, in the end, they will have nothing to lead. The young generation has correctly understood that the future of our planet cannot be regulated in a sustainable manner by the present, still medieval-oriented leading elements. But the young people have also to understand that the necessary change does need enough time for the new structures to become established and durably functioning. The old structures cannot be broken by power other than the natural power of evolution. Every next war is only strengthening the old structures, elongating their agony. The only natural possibility to accelerate the necessary change, as the history of the previous great civilizations of humanity has taught us, lies in the demographic drying out of all older generations. There is always the youngest generation delivering the new soldiers, the new state officials, but also becoming the new, preferably conscious voters, and finally, the new consumers. Let us compare the demographic, sociological, cultural, and political transitions between the previous demographic great civilizations, like those of Greeks, Romans, and the medieval nations. The historical documentation of the transition from the evolutionary era of the New Kingdom civilization to the next era of the Greek civilization, as well as the Phoenician civilization, around 1365 year before Common Era, is very rich and well known. It was the time of the Egyptian queen Nefertiti and of the young pharaoh Tutankhamun, the last one of the royal family of the New Kingdom of Egyptian history. The old leading elements were simply extinct during this transition, without being replaced by similar new ones. Mykenæ prevails as the dominant power throughout the Peloponnese and the entire Aegean. However, they were soon after that overwhelmed by invading Dorian Greeks. During the next evolutionary transition, around the year 247 before Common Era, a similar situation has led to a demographic drying out of the civilizations of Greece and Carthage. The wars of Alexander the Great, and finally the First Punic War, were the main destructive impulses during that transition. Also in the recent centuries of ancient Rome, the efforts to support the then leading elements through rising taxes had bad consequences. For example, slave labor on the land made any improvements unthinkable. Moreover, the higher taxes lowered the birth rate, already lowered by poor living conditions. People declined to marry, and those who did marry, have obtained fewer children. So, also Rome fell for lack of young supporters. Also we are learning this lesson now. Or are we failing to learn it? If the young generation decides today to stop her supporting of the old leading elements of our present world, those leaders will have nothing to lead very soon.